Today, we're going to be tackling EU Disinfo Lab
Okay.
and their work against fake news in Europe.
Yeah.
And you guys are amazing listeners. You've sent in so much great stuff.
It's a lot of stuff.
Notes, FAQs, even some highlights from their recent conference in Riga.
Yeah. Should be interesting.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, to help us unpack all this, we've got an expert here who can sort of shed some light on exactly how EU Disinfo Lab is protecting democracy in, well, this age of misinformation.
It's a pleasure to be here. EU Disinfo Lab is an independent, nonprofit organization, and they really are on the front lines of this fight against disinformation in Europe. They research, share knowledge, advocate for change, and do outreach. Well, it's a really comprehensive approach, a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so before we dive into like their strategies and all that, I got to ask about this. You know, when I was going through your notes, one phrase kind of jumped out at me. Doppelgänger medium impersonation.
Yeah.
It sounds like a spy thriller, honestly. What exactly is going on there?
Oh, it's sneaky, definitely sneaky. So imagine fake websites that look almost identical to real news outlets. Like, their goal is to trick people into believing that they're on a trusted site, and then basically spread disinformation under this guise of legitimacy.
Wow, that's pretty insidious. I can totally see how people would fall for that, especially, you know, if they're just like quickly browsing or something.
Yeah.
Are there like real-world examples of this doppelganger tactic actually happening?
Oh, absolutely. EU Disinfo Lab has uncovered several cases where these disinformation networks, they register domain names that are incredibly similar to legitimate media outlets. So instead of bbc.com, it might be bbc-news.com, something like that. It's really easy to accidentally land on one of these fake sites and just think it's the real deal.
It's like those phishing emails that try to look like they're from your bank or something, right?
Exactly.
You really have to be paying attention to all the little details. And it sounds like EU Disinfo Lab is really like digging into all these techniques. What else are they researching?
Well, AI-generated misinformation is a big one. Using AI to create fake news articles, videos that are incredibly convincing. And as AI technology advances, it's going to be harder and harder to distinguish the real from the fabricated. They're also looking into what they call coordinated inauthentic behavior, which involves networks of fake social media accounts working together to manipulate public opinion.
Okay, so it's not just fake websites anymore. It's like fake everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
This feels like a whole new level of disinformation. Now, this Derail strategy, you mentioned it earlier. How does that fit into all of this?
That's a great question. So Derail, which stands for Directing Responses Against Illicit Influence Operations, represents a pretty significant shift in how we think about fighting disinformation.
Okay.
For years, the focus has been on debunking individual pieces of misinformation, fact-checking articles and so on. But Derail is arguing that we need to go beyond. We need to go beyond just addressing the content itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So if it's not about debunking individual articles, what is it about?
Well, Derail focuses on disrupting the infrastructure behind these operations. So instead of playing whack-a-mole with individual pieces of content, they're actually targeting the funding sources, the networks that are used to spread the disinformation, and even the individuals involved. It's about going after the root of the problem.
So it's about like dismantling the whole system that creates and spreads the disinformation, rather than just dealing with the symptoms, so to speak. Like taking down a criminal organization instead of just arresting the individual foot soldiers.
That's a really good analogy, yeah.
Okay, so how do they actually put this into action? What kind of resources are they using to disrupt these networks and combat disinformation?
They actually offer a surprisingly wide array of resources, all aimed at empowering individuals and organizations to fight back. For instance, they have a dedicated AI Disinfo Hub, which basically helps people understand how AI is being used to create this fake news.
That's really helpful. It's like they're giving people the tools to become like digital detectives or something. Now, I know from materials you sent over that they also have a lot of blog posts and even a newsletter. What kind of topics do they cover? Are they like more technical, or are they geared toward a more general audience?
They do a good job of balancing both.
Yeah.
They have posts that delve into the technical aspects, like how domain names are manipulated for disinformation purposes, that sort of thing. But they also have more accessible content. Like there's a blog post outlining a framework for building effective responses to these campaigns. And their newsletter, it's called Disinfo Update. It connects current events to the world of disinformation.
Okay, so it's both like the deep dives for the folks who want to really get technical, and then more general overviews for those just starting to learn about all this. Do they offer anything for like people who prefer a more interactive learning experience?
They do, actually. They have a wealth of webinars covering, all sorts of topics related to disinformation. And they even have an annual conference. The 2024 conference just wrapped up in Riga, Latvia, and thankfully they made the photos and slides available online for anyone who couldn't attend in person.
That's awesome. It sounds like they're really committed to making all this information accessible to everyone. Now, you also mentioned earlier this coordinated inauthentic behavior detection tree that they developed. That sounds intriguing, but also a bit technical. Can you break that down for us? What is it and how does it work?
Yeah, it's actually a really helpful tool. It helps identify those tricky coordinated disinformation campaigns we were talking about. Basically, it's a step-by-step guide to analyze online activity and look for patterns that might indicate coordinated inauthentic behavior. So like a sudden surge in accounts, all pushing the same message, using similar language. It's like a detective's checklist for spotting online manipulation.
Sounds like they're handing people a magnifying glass and saying, go investigate. That's so cool. Now, it sounds like they're not just focused on equipping individuals. They're also trying to reach policymakers.
That's right. They are. They understand that tackling disinformation requires action at all levels. They even created a booklet specifically for EU decision makers. It's called Countering Disinformation Issues and Solutions for EU Decision Makers. It's a really accessible guide that aims to help those in power, help them understand the complexities of this issue and how to protect society from its harmful effects.
That's great. It really sounds like they're tackling this from all angles. Now, before we move on, I want to hear what stood out to you the most so far about EU Disinfo Lab's approach. What's really resonating with you?
I think what's most fascinating to me is how they're not just focusing on reactive measures, like just debunking things after they happen. They're actively trying to disrupt the entire ecosystem of disinformation. The Derail Strategy is a great example of that proactive mindset. It's about understanding how these campaigns work, identifying the key players, and then targeting their infrastructure and funding sources.
It's like, instead of just reacting to what's already happened, they're playing chess. Like, thinking several moves ahead, which has got to be more effective.
Like long term.
In the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just about winning individual battles, it's about winning the entire war against disinformation.
That's right.
Now, I'm really getting a sense of the scope of their work. They're tackling this on so many levels, and it's clearly not just a European issue, right? Disinformation, it's a global problem. And I'm curious to hear more about how EU Disinfo Lab is collaborating with international partners to address this challenge on a wider scale.
Yeah, that's a great point. First, I think it's important to unpack some of these specific techniques they're researching in more detail. We've touched on AI-generated misinformation and coordinated inauthentic behavior, but let's take a closer look at how these tactics are actually being used in the wild. For instance, have you ever heard of deepfakes?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
Aren't those videos where someone's face is like digitally superimposed onto another person's body? Like that video of Obama that went viral a few years ago?
Exactly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Deepfakes are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and they're being used for everything from political manipulation to spreading rumors, even creating revenge porn.
Wow, that's pretty scary. I mean, if you can't even trust what you see with your own eyes anymore, how are we supposed to navigate this world of, like, information overload?
That's where media literacy and critical thinking become absolutely essential. It's kind of crazy how these techniques, they play on our natural tendencies. Like, we're inclined to believe what we see, and we all want to fit in with our social groups.
Right, it's almost like they're hijacking our psychology to spread their message. And with deepfakes getting so realistic, it really does feel like we're entering this, like, weird, uncanny valley of information where you can't even trust your own senses.
It's a huge challenge, and it's not just deepfakes either. Think about AI-generated text. Like an AI that can write articles or social media posts that are basically indistinguishable from human-written content.
Oh, wow.
That's becoming a reality, and it makes separating fact from fiction even harder.
So it's not just about spotting fake videos anymore. We have to question everything we read online, too.
Pretty much, yeah.
It feels like we're going to need some, like, serious mental gymnastics to stay ahead of all of this.
That's exactly why EU Disinfo Lab's work is so important. They're not just identifying these threats, they're developing strategies to counter them. One of their key focuses is media literacy, basically giving people the tools and knowledge they need to critically evaluate information, no matter where it comes from.
It's like we need to learn a whole new set of digital literacy skills for this new age of information overload, right?
Absolutely.
We're all navigating this vast ocean of content, and we need to learn how to avoid the sharks.
Exactly. Good analogy. And EU Disinfo Lab's like a lighthouse, guiding us towards safe harbor, providing resources, conducting research, advocating for policies that promote a healthier online environment.
You know, we've talked a lot about these external forces at play, these sophisticated campaigns designed to manipulate us. But I think it's also important to acknowledge those internal factors too, the things that can make us more vulnerable to disinformation in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. We're not just blank slates.
Right.
We all have our own biases, our preconceived notions, and those can definitely color how we interpret information.
Exactly. And it's not always a conscious thing either. Sometimes we gravitate towards information that just confirms our existing beliefs, even if it's not totally accurate. It's like we have these mental shortcuts that can lead us astray.
It's true. There's actually a name for that. It's called confirmation bias. We naturally seek out information that reinforces what we already think, and then we tend to dismiss anything that challenges our views.
So it's not just about being aware of external manipulation, but also being aware of our own internal biases.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
It's like we need to develop a healthy skepticism, not just of the information itself, but also of our own reactions to that information.
That's a really good point. It's about being mindful of our own thought processes,
Yeah.
recognizing when we might be falling into that trap of confirmation bias, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Yeah, like being our own internal fact checker.
Yeah.
Constantly questioning our beliefs and being open to different perspectives.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking and media literacy come in. They equip us with the tools to evaluate information objectively, separate fact from opinion, and see when someone's trying to manipulate us, whether it's, external forces or our own biases.
So it's not just about knowing the disinformation techniques, but also knowing ourselves, understanding our own vulnerabilities and how to kind of protect against them.
It's about building up that mental immune system, strengthening our critical thinking skills, and, developing that healthy skepticism towards all information, even the stuff that seems to support our beliefs.
It's a constant process, right? Learning and adapting. Not always easy, but super important if we want to be able to navigate this information landscape and make, well-informed decisions.
It really is. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's one we have to take together.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so let's dive into their international collaborations. You mentioned earlier that disinformation's a global problem. So how is EU Disinfo Lab working with partners in other countries to tackle this on a wider scale?
Well, they recognize that these disinformation campaigns, they often cross national borders, so they're actively partnering with organizations and governments around the world, sharing information, coordinating responses, and developing best practices.
Makes sense. I mean, these disinformation actors, they aren't limited by geography, so our defenses can't be either.
Exactly.
It's like a global game of whack-a-mole. And you need that coordinated effort to be effective. Now, what about the role of tech companies in all this? I mean, so much of this is spreading on social media platforms, right?
Right.
What are they doing to address the problem?
That's the million-dollar question. Social media, it's become this powerful tool for communication, but it's also a breeding ground for disinformation. So EU Disinfo Lab's advocating for greater transparency from these companies, how their algorithms work and how they're addressing the spread of harmful content.
Right, because if these platforms are profiting from engagement, even if that engagement is driven by disinformation, there's like a built-in conflict of interest there, right?
Exactly. That's a key issue that EU Disinfo Lab is highlighting. They're pushing for stricter regulations and greater accountability from these tech giants, but they're also working to educate users about how these platforms can be manipulated and how to be more discerning consumers of information.
So it sounds like they're coming at this from all sides. Working with governments, collaborating with international partners, engaging directly with the companies themselves. It's a very comprehensive approach. But what about individuals? What can we, as everyday people, do to combat disinformation?
That's where media literacy comes in. It's about developing those critical thinking skills, learning how to evaluate sources, fact-check information, and recognize the signs of these disinformation campaigns.
So it's not just about being passive consumers of information. We have to be active participants in the fight, right?
Absolutely.
Question everything, do our own research, and think critically about what we see online.
That's the idea. And EU Disinfo Lab, they provide a lot of great resources to help with that. Their website has tons of information about those disinformation techniques, tips for spotting fake news, even guides for reporting suspicious activity.
So they're like empowering us to be our own disinformation detectives.
Exactly.
That's awesome. And that's something anyone can do,
Right.
regardless of your technical expertise.
That's
Just be mindful, be curious, and be willing to question what you see and hear online.
That's the key takeaway here. We all have a responsibility to be critical consumers of information, and by working together, by sharing knowledge, supporting organizations like EU Disinfo Lab, we can create a more resilient and informed society.
It's really inspiring to see the work they're doing, gives me hope that we can overcome these challenges. But I also feel this sense of urgency, like we're at this critical point where the very fabric of our reality is being challenged by these sophisticated campaigns.
I know what you mean. The stakes are incredibly high. But I do believe that by working together, empowering individuals, holding these powerful actors accountable, we can create a future where truth and accuracy win out.
Yeah, we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to solve this for us. We all have a role to play. And EU Disinfo Lab's giving us the tools and knowledge we need to make a difference.
They are indeed. Their work is a beacon of hope in these challenging times.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about those evolving tactics of disinformation, the importance of media literacy, the role of tech companies, and the need for that global collaboration. It's a complex and constantly changing landscape, but EU Disinfo Lab's clearly at the forefront.
Oh, absolutely. They're a vital resource in the fight against disinformation. And as that line between, reality and fabrication gets blurrier, their work is only going to become more important.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to hear what you think is the most crucial thing for our listener to take away from all this. What's the one message you really want them to remember?
That's a good question. For me, it boils down to this. Don't be afraid to question everything. Be skeptical, be curious, be your own fact checker. The tools and resources are out there. And organizations like EU Disinfo Lab, they're here to help us navigate this complex world of information.
That's a powerful message. It's about taking ownership of our information consumption. And not just blindly accepting everything we see online. It's about being active participants in that fight for the truth.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being aware, being engaged, and being willing to learn and adapt as that information landscape continues to evolve.
It's a continuous process of learning and adaptation. And it's not always easy, but it's essential if we want to navigate this world and make informed decisions.
I agree completely. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey we all have to take together.
Well said. EU Disinfo Lab is doing really incredible work, empowering people and organizations to fight back. They're providing the tools, the knowledge, and the inspiration we need to make a difference.
It's true. Their work's a real testament to the power of collaboration and research. And, that commitment to truth and accuracy.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to explore the work of EU Disinfo Lab. Check out their website, dive into their blog posts and webinars, and see how you can get involved, because the battle for truth is one that we have to fight together. That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay vigilant.